What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So let me ask, what do you think is the best-selling Samsung phone? I feel like a lot of people's default answer might be this, the latest flagship, the S23, but that's actually not the case. In fact, over the last few years, that's not been the case. And what's even more surprising is Samsung's regular S series phones don't even crack the top 10 list of the best-selling smartphones, or even the top 10 best-selling Android devices. And it doesn't matter where in the world you want to tabulate those lists or what time of the year you're using to count up the sales numbers. There hasn't been a single point in time that I found over the last few years that a regular Samsung S series phone was a top-selling device. The Ultras seem to make those lists from time to time, and Samsung's A-series phones, including both the budget devices like the A03 and A13 and the mid-tier phones like the A53, are consistently top sellers around the world. So why aren't people buying this phone? I think it's a pretty good device with a lot of great features. Sure, the S-series hasn't changed a whole lot the last 2 or 3 years, and the price is still pretty high. And those budget and mid-tier devices I mentioned actually have a lot of similar features now to this phone. So I guess I'm starting to answer my own question, but I also want to hear from you. Have you purchased a new Samsung smartphone recently? If so, which one? And if not, how come? Let me know in the comments. In the meantime, I'm going to go over everything you need to know about this new S23 now that it's been out for more than a month or so. I'll talk about the very small upgrades this phone received, what I think it does well, the things I wish that were better, and hopefully this will help you decide if maybe you'll be one of the dozens of people who end up buying an S23 this year. And by the way, if you happen to be shopping for a new wireless carrier as well, I'd highly recommend checking out Tello. I've been using them for the last 6 months now, and they've been amazing. Tello offers affordable and customizable phone plans, so you pay for exactly what you need only when you need it. Tello offers unlimited data plans starting at just $29 a month, which is super affordable compared to the big name carriers. They provide nationwide 4G LTE and 5G coverage, so you get the same great service as those big wireless companies at a fraction of the cost. You also get additional things like free hotspot and Wi-Fi calling and international calls to more than 30 countries. There's no extra fees and no commitments. You can cancel your plan at any time or make adjustments to it on the go, which I really like. And Tello also makes it super easy to just use your current phone on their network. Most GSM or unlocked devices are eligible, and you can check their website to see if you're compatible. Tello offers the most flexible and affordable phone plans out there, and they're also highly rated by their current customers, me included. Create a custom plan and see how much you can save at Tello.com, or click the link in the video description below. And thanks so much to Tello for sponsoring this video. So one of the first things that I think still gets overlooked on this regular S23 is its size. In a world of Ultras and Maxes, the 6.1-inch form factor is small by today's standards, but that I think is what makes it so great. It's compact and comfortable both in your hand and in your pocket, and one-handed use for scrolling, typing, or picture taking is easy. I actually don't know of many other devices that are smaller than this now, the Asus Zenfone 9 and the Google Pixel 6a, but most everything else out there nowadays is 6.5 inches and above. Samsung opted to just barely alter the look of this phone for 2023, and you'd probably be forgiven if you thought it was exactly the same. They mostly just refined the camera bump area again, but this is easily the simplest and cleanest look we've ever had. You still get the premium frosted glass back and polished aluminum frame that just barely justifies its high price point, at least with the build materials. I just wish Samsung would go back to offering some fun colors with these phones. This lavender is about as interesting as it gets, and honestly it's closer to a whitish pink than anything else. We've got army green, black, and this sort of off-white color as your only other options. It's all just super boring. Nothing else physically has changed about this phone. Same old buttons, same lack of a headphone jack, and no expandable storage. It has a SIM card tray though, which, coming from my eSIM iPhone woes, this is honestly just nice to still have. It's easy to set up, easy to swap out. It still has eSIM options, but you aren't forced to use it. When it comes to the screen and the viewing experience, the S23's 6.1-inch dynamic AMOLED panel is now brighter than ever, with auto brightness peaking at about 1750 nits versus 1300 nits last year, and the user-controlled brightness maxing out at 1200. Besides that though, the color, clarity, and rest of the screen specs remain basically the same. It's still just a 2340 by 1080 resolution screen, and I say just because the Ultra is the one with the QHD resolution and, well, the S20 from 3 years ago, but that's not important to mention. The screen is plenty sharp, especially at this size. You get 425 pixels per inch, and no matter how close you look, everything is crisp. It's also a very bold and vibrant display, same as years past, and you can opt for some slightly different color profiles and settings if you'd like. And of course, this is a 120Hz adaptive high refresh rate display, which gives you that silky smooth and super responsive look and feel. And I feel like a lot of people have mentioned this before, but this phone does feel very fast, whether it's a more responsive or smoother display or just better performance with the internal specs. Between the regular S series and the Ultra, these are certainly the snappiest Samsung phones I've played around with in a while. But all in all, if you're looking to be wowed by a brand new display or even want the highest specs and best picture, this phone is fine, but there are other Android devices like the Ultra and some new gaming devices that offer both a higher resolution and a greater refresh rate. As far as I know, the out loud listening experience on this phone remains unchanged as well. You still get a dual speaker setup with one dedicated speaker at the bottom and one secondary speaker in the earpiece. I sort of wish Samsung would just commit to 2 full-size dedicated speakers on the top and bottom like some other smartphones have, or at least go back to emphasizing audio like they used to do with AKG, but for this phone, there's really nothing wrong. Okay, so let's talk specs and performance. And I have a few thoughts here. First off, like I mentioned a second ago, the S23 this year feels really fast. It's powered by the new Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor, and it seems to have been topped out at 8 gigs of RAM now for the last few release cycles, but that's been fine as well. And here are the current Geekbench 6 performance scores for you to compare. In real-world use, this phone has been phenomenal. It's very quick, very responsive, and very well optimized too. I think another element to this equation is Android 13 and Samsung's One UI 5.1. I honestly feel like their biggest competition in the space is Google's Pixel software experience, at least for performance and optimization. And the years of gimmicky, bloated Samsung software seem to be long gone. This is now just a relatively minimal and streamlined Android experience, albeit still very Samsung, and it seems to me like they've put almost as much emphasis on updates as Google has. The single biggest thing still holding this phone back, I think, is the support, or lack thereof, the longevity. Samsung says they'll give the S23s 4 major Android updates in the coming years, and an additional year of security patches beyond that, and that's great. You at least know the $800 or more you fork over for this phone will be spread out across a greater time frame than some previous Samsung phones from a couple of years ago. But when Apple still offers iOS 16 on their iPhone 10, which came out in the fall of 2017, it still feels like Samsung leaves its customers of yesterday with very little value. To make a somewhat fair comparison, that would be the same as Samsung updating the S8 to Android 13. People are upgrading their phones nowadays less and less frequently, and it's not uncommon to see someone have a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old smartphone now. These devices obviously haven't changed much recently anyway, and if the apps still work, that's all most people need. But Samsung seems to still be content on either forcing people to upgrade after a certain point, or simply just ignoring customers who have an older device. And that, I think, is one of the bigger reasons right now that Samsung is struggling to keep its customer base with these S-series phones, and probably one of the reasons why this phone has stopped selling so well. It's much easier nowadays to just get a new $300 or $400 A-series phone every couple of years with a similar software support timeline than forking over $800 or $900 on this when it doesn't get updates for much longer of a time frame. By the way, jumping back to the topic of optimization, while Samsung didn't really change the battery size on the S23, this phone I found does last quite a bit longer than last year's S22. The thing about small phones is that they tend to have small size batteries. This one has a 3900 mAh battery inside, which yes, technically is a tiny bit larger, but during day-to-day use, I've been getting 7 to 8 hours of screen on time at least, sometimes beyond that, with no special settings or lower refresh rate. The phone learns as you go, and I think One UI and Android have gotten better at truly optimizing battery life. So that's great, and this is a small phone that is an all-day device. The downside for the S23 specifically is that this phone supports only up to 25 watts of wired charging speeds. The S23 Plus and S23 Ultra can charge with 45 watts of power, but the average person would never know that because you don't get any charging brick in the box, and most people still just use some random USB-A plug they've been carrying around for the last 5 years. So charging speeds, at least on Samsung phones now, are essentially irrelevant, as harsh as that sounds. While other Android smartphones are pushing the limits on speed, Samsung is not only not even emphasizing it anymore, but not even informing their customers on the best way to charge the devices, or even offering them the bare minimum accessories to do so. Finally, let's talk cameras. Now, on the one hand, there's actually not a lot to say here, simply because Samsung didn't really upgrade the cameras on the S23 this year, which is weird. It seems like camera tech is the only thing these smartphone makers have been worrying about recently, but this S23 gets essentially the same 50 megapixel main lens, 10 megapixel telephoto lens, and 12 megapixel ultra-wide lens as last year. The selfie camera, I guess, has a few more megapixels to mention, 12 megapixels versus 10 on last year's phone, but generally speaking, this is essentially the same camera hardware, powered by the same camera software and features as last year. Are there some improvements to the real-world results? Sure, I think these pictures look really sharp. I'd recommend shooting in the 50 megapixel mode if you want as much detail as possible, and with low light and nighttime shots, it seems to me like you get a little less noise and a more balanced looking picture. The actual action of taking a nighttime shot, the shutter and processing, is also faster too. I think that's again due to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chip, but as weird as it sounds, for the first time in a while, I can confidently say that if you have last year's S22, you aren't missing out on anything with this year's S23 when it comes to the cameras. And it's been a long time, really, since I've been able to say that.
And one last thing I just want to mention, I know there's been a lot of talk about Samsung faking their super zoom moon pictures on the S23 Ultra, and well, this phone seems to do the same thing. The moon is always facing us from the same side, it always looks the same, so basically the phone recognizes the moon as the subject and puts a moon image mask over the bright blobby white light that the phone picks out. I mean, this is a great picture, but I think it's a little too good, right? Smartphone pictures and videos always have that extra processing to give you the best looking shot possible. But the difference between a regular nighttime image that's been enhanced to the best of the phone's ability versus this crystal clear shot of the moon makes it obvious that Samsung does some funky things. And I think that's just a product of them advertising the super zoom moon pictures so much over the last couple of years that they backed themselves into a corner and wound up overcompensating just to try and impress people.
So overall, the S23 no doubt is a solid device. It's sleek, it's powerful, with a bold, bright display and great camera setup. There's just not much that's new compared to last year. And I think that's one of the reasons why so few people will end up buying it. With nothing really new, it's also hard to justify the price point, especially when last year's phone, renewed on Amazon, is like half the price right now. And if you wanted a new Samsung phone, you could just get an A34 or A54 instead. Those were just announced, and you'll get the same number of Android updates anyway. And you could get 2 or 3 A-series phones over the next few years for the price of one S-series phone. All in all, I guess there are plenty of reasons why this phone isn't going to be a bestseller again this year, but what do you guys think? Am I being too harsh? Let me know in the comments down below. Love to hear your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.